The last two talks, we've talked a lot about diabetes and weight loss, so we're not going to talk much about that this time. But if any of you want to sort of know what we talked about, it's on Substack, and where else is it, Shelley?
Twitter, Instagram, Facebook.
So we got
our new podcast,
our older material.
Walk, Don't Run to the Doctor with Miles Hassell.
Oh, and then, do we have a copy of Mia's and my book? Let's wave that around too. So pretty much everything we talk about is also in the book that my sister Mia and I wrote, which is now its 4th edition. Some of you probably have it. Yeah, you can. And if you don't like one of the recipes, blame her. If you don't like the technical stuff, blame me. So we're going to be talking about the power of lifestyle medicine in the prevention and treatment of disease. And lifestyle medicine basically means using just your everyday activities, your everyday food choices, your everyday household chores, and so on, to optimize your health. It's not anti-medicine. So one of the things that feedback we often get is people think that we're anti-medicine. I'm a conventional MD, and I write prescriptions for stuff and send people to surgeons, and we take care of chemotherapy every day. So this isn't anti-medicine. It is saying, however, that in most disease states, your lifestyle choices are more important than conventional medicine. But we would like to point out that lifestyle medicine goes back to Hippocrates. There's nothing new about this. Lifestyle medicine is mainstream medicine, I would submit. It's just been sort of forgotten with the stranglehold that the big pharma have on us. Not that I have an opinion. So in these talks, we hope to present sort of the basics of creating your own plan for taking advantage of your healing power. And when you say healing power, some people think that's sort of woo-woo. And in one sense it is, because it's pretty magical what your body is able to do. And we'll give a couple of examples of that. And remembering that we're fearfully and wonderfully made is not a bad idea. And say, wow, within that, what does that mean in terms of whether I'm going to depend on my body's built-in healing design or something else as a first step? It's not that, once again, it's not that we don't use pharmaceuticals and surgery, but we think they should be thought of second, not first. And that's why our podcast is called Walk, Don't Run to the Doctor. So first of all, walk to the fridge, walk to the path, walk to your sauna, walk to your stove, and then maybe walk to me, or somebody. What are basic lifestyle health tools? There's diet. We'll talk about that. Activity, waste management. So people are often asking us, what should I weigh? Well, I don't know what you should weigh, and nobody else does either. But if you got too much tummy, then you probably weigh too much, regardless of what your weight is. Sunlight, really an underappreciated health tool. Heat, sauna, and hot baths have been used for the entire recorded history of humankind. Faith, really an important, epidemiologically, really an important indicator of good health. Sleep, relationships, purpose, fun. Purpose is also one of the aspects that isn't discussed very much. It probably ties in closely with faith, but it's a very, very strong indicator, especially as you get older, especially for dementia. Your sense of purpose. We often ask patients this, and it's amazing how many of our patients say, you know what, I can't really answer that. And we hope that they think about it later. And fun. When you think of there's a Bible verse that says, except you be as little children, you shall not enter the kingdom of God. And I get a kick out of that, because that could mean many things. You could go different directions with that, but maybe we need to play more. And maybe that's why grandparents have grandchildren. Not to give them 90% chocolate. Not talking about anybody in particular here who might do that to their grandchildren, but and we'll actually, we've got a kind of an oddball case of a treatment with honey that we'll talk about, just to show you how wild things can get in the lifestyle medicine space. What are some bad guys for lifestyle medicine? Processed foods. There's extremely consistent data that highly processed foods lead to greater rates of almost every disease, including total mortality. The trouble is the way the data is collected, we don't know which processed foods are the problem. They're all lumped together, but it's worth noting the strength of the data for this. Refined sweeteners, sitting. There's this saying that sitting is the new smoking. It's probably reasonably accurate. If you're sitting for more than an hour at a time, think twice. Not getting enough sleep, isolation, lack of purpose, we talked about. And when you're thinking about the lifestyle medicine scene, and I hope I've already made this clear, but try not to get siloed. Try not to be all about lifestyle medicine and general medicine. People are horrifying and the enemy. People like me. Because what matters is our results. And so if problem X isn't getting results with treatment Y, then it doesn't matter if treatment Y is organic and natural and produced by Norwegian trolls. If it's not working, it's not working. And we see this all the time with people having chronic illness and they're on natural medicine and it's not working and they keep doing the natural medicine and complaining about the results. Well, if something's not working, change something. And so figure out what results you're looking for and go after that. And that might involve calling a surgeon, but we'll try to avoid that. So if you're going to assess what works with lifestyle medicine, sometimes it's really easy. For diabetics, you've got HbA1c, which is a very useful indicator. You might have high blood pressure. Maybe it's just a matter of losing weight. Other times they're a bit more subtle, but you know what they are. If your well-being or your mood or your energy or your pain, how many medicines you're taking, what kind of sleep quality you're getting. And then sometimes you just have to have faith. So for example, if you're eating right and exercising and you're 70 years old and you haven't had any heart problems or high blood pressure or anything, then you can say, hey, maybe I have prevented those things by my good choices, or maybe I just would have been one of those people that didn't get them anyway. So don't be too proud of yourself. You might have just been healthy. Some people just get great genes. Actually, and I hadn't really thought about this, but in relation to that, don't forget the placebo effect. 30 to 50% of the time, if you give people nothing, they get better. And we think that's pretty useful because so often people say, you know what, is that after that, I had this yesterday. You know, it was that 4th course of antibiotics that finally treated my sinusitis. And I said, well, maybe you just got better by yourself. You know, after 4 courses of antibiotics, you know, things get better. And he was not impressed by that answer at all. But it's true. When we're talking about lifestyle medicine, it's always useful to go back and say, does it work? And when does it work? In the previous talks that I mentioned, we talked a lot about type 2 diabetes, so we thought for people who've been to more than one of these talks, we wouldn't bore you to death yet again. So we'll talk a little bit about heart disease and stroke data, autoimmune disease, multiple sclerosis, mood and mental health, and cancer survivorship. And then we'll talk about what the title of this talk is about, which is making things happen in your life, which takes self-discipline. That's offensive in some circles, but it requires self-discipline. So this is a slide we use quite a bit. This is from the Nurses Health Study, Health Professionals Follow-Up Study. And it's one of those gigantic epidemiologic studies that have been going on for about 40 years. Good quality data. And it identifies that this vaguely described good health, good diet quality, not being too chubby, a body mass index means you don't have a big tummy. 30 minutes or more a day per day of vigorous physical activity, moderate alcohol, and not smoking, that combination of 5 factors is associated with living 12 to 14 years longer, dramatically less heart disease, dramatically less stroke, dramatically less cancer, and about 90% less diabetes. So, we wouldn't have a healthcare crisis in this country if people did those 5 things. So we could actually probably stop the talk now. It's a nice evening out there. One of the things I find most interesting here in this is this 30 minutes or more a day of moderate to vigorous activity. And most people don't do that. Most people know that it's important, and most people don't do that. So think, look for identified things throughout this that really pertain to you. And if we get a chance to talk about why that matters, or how to make it happen in your life, then we can. Just on some identifying some major data points. This is one of the landmark trials on the Mediterranean diet for heart disease. It's a randomized controlled trial of people who had just had a heart attack. You had to have recently had a heart attack to get into this study. So a pretty high-risk group. And half the people were put on a reasonably good quality diet, not their usual diet, and the other half were put on a Mediterranean-style diet. And after 4 years, 70% reduction in cardiac events, heart attack, stroke in the Mediterranean diet group, 56% reduction in all-cause mortality, which is a really important finding, especially if you're one of the people who are still alive, 60% less cancers. A surprising result at the time, but it's been noted in multiple studies since then. It was independent of anything else, including cholesterol. Including, I was talking to one of the reviewers for New England Journal about this study, and he said, "Hey, Miles, you might want to know why I didn't accept this paper for the New England Journal." And I was expecting my legs to be cut off the knees in front of this crowd. And he said, "It's because I did not appreciate at the time that you could reduce heart disease without affecting cholesterol." And so there was nothing to measure in this study to explain the outstanding results or the subsequent results in studies. One of the things interesting about this particular study is on the Mediterranean diet group, they had the people cooking at home. They had certain foods that they were supposed to eat and cook at home. And it was an often overlooked aspect to how this study was run. So that's heart disease. I'm going to talk about autoimmune disease because this was an interesting case that we dealt with recently that was a whole team affair. We had nephrology, rheumatology, and general internal medicine on this case. But this lady who comes to us with, and so it talks about the team approach where you're using conventional medicine and lifestyle medicine. So the lady comes to us with feeling pretty poorly, some fevers, very non-specific symptoms, and on basic lab tests, she had rapidly progressive kidney failure. She was heading for dialysis in a matter of days. Her kidneys were going south that fast. So we admitted her to this hospital for immunosuppression, so she had very high-dose steroids and Rituxan. Rituxan, it might be of interest, it's $20,000 a dose. And it knocks out one element of your immune response. So it's pretty toxic stuff. It's also pretty life-saving stuff under some conditions. So all of this stabilized her kidneys. She starts maybe even getting a little bit better. She gets discharged, and on discharge, we got her onto a pretty aggressive lifestyle program. Diet, exercise 3 times a day. She was feeling awful. We still got her to exercise 3 times a day. You can always find something. You can wave soup cans, just something that makes you short of breath. We got her weight down because being overweight is a strong driver of autoimmune disease. Got her out in the sun, heat therapy, hot bath, saunas would have been great. And we rapidly tapered her to with eyebrows raised from other members of the team. We were able to rapidly taper her off her highly toxic medication. So for those of you familiar with prednisone, for example, she was expected to be on 70 milligrams a day of prednisone for the next month. So think of that next time. We started at half that and dropped it from that point. 70 milligrams of prednisone a day really can drive you into diabetes. For some people, it makes them manic. Other people makes them depressed. It can often mess up your sleep. It can often cause osteoporosis, even in fairly short-term use. So that's useful if you really need it to save your life. But if you don't really need it because you're employing other factors, then we can modify it. And so this is a disease that had lots of markers we could follow. So we knew if she was going to go off the rails. So we had a basket of about 10 different markers we followed really closely, initially every couple of days and then every couple of weeks. And all evidence of her disease normalized rapidly, despite having no further. She should have had 4 doses of Rituxan by now. She's had no more. She only had the 1 dose in the hospital. She should still be on steroids. She's not. She's living a normal life with 0 medications and 0 evidence of the disease. She's got a tiny bit of residual proteinuria. It's a pretty low level. It's not quite normal, but it's. And the renal doctor, he just saw her and he said, did not expect this. And that is a fantastic result in his notes. We also saved the taxpayer like probably $100,000. Something like that. But more importantly, we saved her a lot of consequences of really severe medications. But we still used them when she needed them. And so this is an example of where, and I put down here about don't try this at home. If anybody takes this and says, wow, this looks like a good idea for, when I get lupus, then she didn't have lupus, but then that would be really dumb because this was a lot of work and a team effort. So it's an example of how you can tell your body to do its job. And multiple sclerosis is another autoimmune disease that we think is where the lifestyle approaches are not appreciated. But whole food diets are associated with less MS, less progression of disease. Waste management improves many of the quality of life factors of MS and probably reduce progression. The data are pretty sketchy. And exercise has both symptomatic benefit as well as disease-modifying benefit, meaning reducing progression of the disease as well. Nobody's ever done any good studies, unlike for heart disease and diabetes. Nobody's done any good studies using these techniques together in a longitudinal fashion in people with MS. But we have enough evidence in other autoimmune diseases and evidence in terms of overall health to say this is worth a try. And so we talked about heart disease and stroke. We talked about MS and other autoimmune diseases. And think about depression and mood. So patients come to us with depression, and they look at me and soberly, they're sober, of course, because they have depression, and they say, I have biochemical depression, I need medications. And maybe they do need medications, but you can alter the biochemistry of your brain just like the biochemistry everywhere else in your body. Just because you have depression doesn't mean you have a drug deficiency. And that's an important step, I think, in all of this lifestyle medicine idea is, do I have something that might respond to lifestyle medicine, or do I have a true drug deficiency? There aren't too many true drug deficiencies, frankly. And so to use this in terms of psychiatric disease or mood disorders, you have to take on this statement that assume our brains can change more than we think they can. And this is kind of a fun example. So this is a guy in England who didn't have much brain. He lived a perfectly normal life. And they only found this because he'd gotten in a car accident and somebody did a CT scan of his head. And say, whoa, there's kind of no brain here. Because all of this, for all this black stuff, that's all just fluid. So normally that would be full of brain. The brain here is all this little rim around the edge. So normally a 44-year-old guy would have a skull full of brain. He had a skull full of water. And he lived a normal life. And there's numerous cases like this in literature. They're always just a blast. Because it teaches you not to assume anything. Because if this kid probably had a CT scan when he was 4, he probably would have been told, you'll amount to nothing, kid. You don't got no brain. And haven't you learned anything? Instead, he lived a normal life because he didn't know he shouldn't. So think of that next time somebody says you can't do X. So this is an interesting patient we have that, she was just kind of miserable. And she's worried about diabetes. She's weighed too much. And this is a pretty common kind of case to have. These are the kind of people we see a lot. Not much local social support. And worried about things like type 2 diabetes and high blood pressure and stuff, partly due to her weight, BMI of 38. She's pretty chubby. But you say, you know what, to this person, maybe you can be a lot healthier. Maybe you don't have to be depressed. Maybe you don't have to have fatigue. Maybe you don't have to have diabetes. Maybe you don't have to have a BMI of 38. And so you sort of coach them as to the changes they can make, exercise, eating less, eating better, And in her case, within a couple of weeks, and we see this a lot with people who eat better and lose a few pounds, is how often they say, wow, I'm thinking more clearly, I'm feeling more upbeat. And it's all kind of subtle, but it's a standard line we hear from patients all the time without leading the witness, I promise. They offer it to us. Anyway, so improving mood and anxiety. And in over 8 months, she lost 36 pounds, lost her prediabetes. And the thing she identified that made the biggest difference is she adjusted her portions. She got rid of her sweet drinks. Less potatoes, they were a big factor in her calorie intake. Took up racquetball. Took a different attitude towards what was going on in her life. Counted blessings, and got back to church. All these different things that made a difference to how she lived her life. And it's made a big difference. The interesting thing about depression is there's a ton of data on this. So this is a couple of different studies. So whenever you're looking at data, always avoid seeing studies that only represent one group. And the reason is you can find a single study to prove just about anything you want. And so when you find systematic reviews and meta-analysis and so on, it tends to be a much more powerful type of data set. So in this case, this was looking at 7 studies with almost 50,000 patients with depression, and just looking at dietary interventions. These were not exercise interventions. We would argue that exercise works as well as diet and works as well as any of our pharmaceuticals for depression in general. They found that all of the studies using diet for depression were helpful. No, there were no negative studies, and that the whole food diets had a little bit better benefit than other diets. And so those were in intervention studies. If you look at observational studies, then the Mediterranean diet studies stand out the most in terms of just looking at the population in general. NHANES is a big North American data set, and found about half as much depression in people that followed a Mediterranean-style diet in that population. This is another randomized controlled trial that was kind of fun. I trained in Australia, so of course Australian studies like this always stand out. They took these people with moderate to severe depression and put them on a 12-week study, so a fairly short study, randomizing to a Mediterranean-style diet versus social support. So the social support people just eat whatever you normally eat, and we'll have somebody talk to you a lot. And most of them were so there's no change in psychotherapy and antidepressant medications between the two groups. But they all had moderate to severe depression at the time of entering into the study. The Mediterranean diet group had 3 to 4 servings of red meat. That's actually kind of interesting in the mood disorder literature. Red meat seems to be highly favorable towards a better brain function. Chicken, eggs, olive oil, up to 2 servings of alcohol per day. Remember, this was an Australian study. So and 40% of the calories is fat, so fairly low carb. They're told to avoid refined sugars, processed meats, fast foods. And in the Mediterranean diet group, there's 1/3 of them after 12 weeks did not have depression. In the world of depression, this is a big result. If you're somebody with depression, it's a big result. This gives me a chance to push olive oil, which I do. It doesn't take much to bring that subject up. Extra virgin olive oil, or olive oil in general, is associated with depression, less cancer, less dementia, less total mortality, and so on. This was a paper that just came out, I think today or yesterday or something like that, where they showed that olive oil all by itself was almost 1/3 less, 1/3 fewer deaths related to dementia in that population, regardless of what other things that people ate. So extra virgin olive oil, there's something pretty special about that, as near as I can tell. And processed foods, there's something pretty special about that too, including in mood disorders. Higher all-cause mortality, we already talked about, but it's also related to more depression and anxiety, and that's based on 17 observational studies. So if I haven't pounded away at the subject of processed foods enough, then don't worry, I will some more. Cancer survivorship. So we talked about heart disease and stroke and diabetes a little bit, and autoimmune disease, and mental health. The cancer survivorship and cancer prevention data I think is interesting because the kind of results that we're seeing here actually are very comparable to what we get with conventional therapy. And that's not to say we would do this instead of conventional therapy. But just as we would talk to a patient about chemotherapy or radiation, let's say for the breast cancer, we should be giving equal weight to this. Ann McTiernan is a author of some of the papers I'm presenting here at the University of Washington at the Hutch, and she comments that, why doesn't every cancer treatment facility have an exercise bike or something like that right next to where the patient is? Why not? And of course, a lot of the data used is hers. So, a high level of physical activity. So many of these studies, they look at the top level of physical activity in a group and the bottom level and compare them. So we can't necessarily tell you how much physical activity is necessary for you, but I can make some suggestions, which is usually more than you are now. But 10 to 20% relative risk reduction for developing most cancers. You can imagine how much misery that would reduce in our population, how much cost, how much, and so on. And in patients with cancer, 40 to 50% relative risk reduction in death. Once again, very comparable to all of our conventional therapies, except for surgery. We still can't beat the surgeons. And you might say, well, that's just for breast, colorectal, and prostate cancer. So much of this data is based just around breast and colorectal cancers. And there really isn't great data for most of the other cancers. So we often just assume it must apply to other cancers as well. But especially breast cancer it dominates the literature from lifestyle medicine. So that's partly where the funding is, partly where the interest is. Breast cancer, for example, affects a lot of younger women, and so the potential for life saved and the importance to society is frankly just considered higher than an 80-year-old with prostate cancer. And most 80-year-olds have prostate cancer, in case you're wondering. So that wasn't a very nice thing to say, but it was true.
None of us women do.
Huh?
None of us women
True.
do what?
She's just pointing out that none of the women in the audience have prostate cancer. But this is Portland, so you watch out, Asha. Yeah. In general, out of the diets that have used, I was talking about exercise there, and oddly enough, a lot of this data is not combined. We don't have good data for what happens with exercise and what happens with diet and what happens with diet and exercise. A lot of this, the very siloed data. So similarly with risk reduction with diet, and the Mediterranean diet pattern dominates the literature for cancer benefit. In addition, for both exercise and diet, it's interesting that you see better chemotherapy efficacy. In other words, taking better care of yourself through your cancer treatment improves the benefit of conventional cancer treatment. So your chemotherapy is going to work better, and you're going to have fewer side effects. You're going to have fewer long-term problems from the therapy. And so that's another reason why it should be pushed, because people will simply do better, even from the conventional perspective. If you take better care of yourself, for example, you're going to do better in surgery. You're going to recover faster after surgery. You're going to have fewer complications of surgery. And so when you're trying to convince yourself that it's worth exercising when you don't feel like exercising, or losing weight when you really want to have that dessert, or that sweet drink or whatever, remember that you're actually going to make everything better about your life. And so in creating a battle plan for you, and I mentioned and yours, because most of us don't live in isolation. And if we take care of ourselves better, those we love around us are going to take care of themselves better. that dropping a pebble into a pond effect. So it's worth fighting for good health. And the reason is all the reasons I just said. You're going to have a better life. You're going to spend less money. You're going to have more time to do things other than visit people like me. And who wins? And everybody wins, and including the taxpayer. It's kind of funny because I'm talking to people all the time who complain about the cost of medical care, but they don't take care of themselves. And you're thinking, well, if you lost 20 pounds, you wouldn't need that expensive blood pressure drug, buddy. But I don't say that. So start with some, if you're thinking about doing this, think it starts for some clear goals. What benefits are you looking for? Is it weight? Is it mood? Is it energy? What is it? And have some ways of measuring if you're heading in the right direction, because that also inspires you to keep going. And for many healthy people, because a lot of people, they feel fine and they're eating junk and they don't exercise and they're still feeling great. It's not really fair, but that's the way it is. But that person can say, you know what? I don't need to take care of I don't have an obvious need to take care of myself, but I have an obvious need to be a better example to somebody else. And failure to plan is planning to fail. So one of the standard questions I ask patients is, hey, what are you going to have for dinner tonight? You wouldn't believe how many people don't know what they're going to have for dinner tonight. It's like 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Now, how in the world are you going to eat well if you don't have those kinds of plans in place? I don't want to look at anybody or ask any questions and embarrass anybody here, but I bet you some of you at 2 o'clock this afternoon didn't know what you're going to have for dinner tonight. Aha! What are you going to have for breakfast, lunch, evening meal, snacks? Have all this stuff planned out. One of the standard things we do for weight loss is have people eat a large serving of fruit or vegetables before every meal and snack. We claim that it works every time. You can never trust a doctor who says that something works every time, but it's pretty close. So for example, imagine every evening you had 6 apples. And those 6 apples had to be consumed the next day before you ate anything else for every meal. I mean, I don't mean all 6 at once. But before breakfast you had an apple, and before lunch you had an apple or 2, and so on. You get the idea. Pretty much everybody loses weight if they do that. How many people who would tell me that they genuinely want to lose weight actually do that? Not too many. In other words, they don't have the motivation to plan. And so ask yourself, if you're struggling, do you have the motivation to plan, or is it just sort of a vague concept for you? Because this doesn't work in terms of vague concepts. I've got a patient who had diabetes. He was about 82. He had diabetes. He was pretty chubby, didn't exercise. His hip hurt. Kidneys weren't great. And I said, you're 82, but you really don't have to act like you're 90. You could act like you're 70 or 65. So he started working out for 45 minutes every day, every morning. Got rid of a lot of the junk food he was eating. Lost a bunch of weight. Diabetes gone. Kidneys improved. Hip felt a lot better. 6 or 8 years go by. His hip starts hurting again. We say, well, it looks like you need a new hip. He said, is that surgery going to kill me? I said, no, because you're in such great shape. He breezes through the surgery. Same day surgery. 80, I think by then he was 87 or 88. Breezes through the surgery, no problems. If he had been the other guy, he probably would have had a lot of complications from his surgery. Instead, he's living just a normal life independently. So, planning. Planning and execution. Decide what you're going to do and do it. Don't pretend otherwise, and don't blame anybody else if you don't do it. People say, well, I was going out to dinner. I said, well, show me the menu for the place you're going out to dinner. I'll tell you what to eat. A lot of people don't like to hear that. Other people phone us up and we sort of go over the restaurant menu and say, hey, I'd have this and this and this. And they say, oh, that sounds pretty good, and it works well. And what do you need to do to be short of breath and sweaty 3 times tomorrow? For most of us, it doesn't take long. Things like jumping jacks, skipping rope, climbing stairs, you can get short of breath and sweaty to some degree pretty fast, like minutes. This doesn't take a lot of time. Take a lot of time if you want to, but you're not your lack of exercise isn't due to the fact that you don't have time to exercise, is my point. If you do 1 minute 3 times a day of something vigorous, you're going to be 1,000 times healthier than if you didn't. I often suggest to people, imagine that you're, say, 60 or 70, and you do one skip with a skip rope, just one skip. I should have brought the skip rope, just demonstrate. That's all you do. But you do it every day for the rest of your life. Are you going to be a different 90-year-old than you would have been otherwise? Just that one little skip? Because your balance is going to be better. Your pride will be better. Your self-righteousness will be better. So you got a plan. And so when you think about planning, so Mia wrote a section in the book called what do I eat? Because we say all these things you shouldn't eat, and people say, well, what's left? And so, funny you should ask that. We have the answer. That's on page 35 of Good Food, Great Medicine, the 4th edition. So what vegetables, fruits, beans, and grains are you going to have tomorrow? And if you have a vegetable or a whole fruit with every meal and snack, you're probably going to lose weight, and you're going to get a gold star from us. We do really give gold stars in our practice, I promise. Proteins. Make sure your energy is often based on protein. Your ability to heal is based on proteins. And don't be too fussy about what proteins you get. There aren't too many naturally occurring whole food proteins that aren't good for you. In fact, I can't think of any. On the other hand, those highly processed powders that they sell for ridiculous amounts of money at gyms, is there any evidence those are good for you? I'm not aware of any. And so watch out for the chemical. We call those chemical constructs. If you really want to embarrass somebody, ask them how they're actually made. Probiotic foods. This is a big area that's just not really appreciated. If you feed the right bugs into your gut, you're going to be healthier. Your immune system is going to work better. Your blood sugar is going to be lower. You're going to find an easier time to lose weight. All kinds of your cholesterol will be lower. There are a lot of these, we actually don't fully know why this is the case. And this is with food. Nobody really knows what to put in those little overpriced capsules that you get called probiotics. So we're not talking about probiotic supplements. We're talking about real food. In fact, for many of the people in the probiotic world, they say that the most important contributor to the probiotics in your gut are actually just whole foods. Because most whole foods are kind of dirty. They have bugs. And so eating an apple might be as important as having sauerkraut, though we still recommend sauerkraut. Apple cider vinegar and wine are interesting because in and of themselves, they don't have bugs, but they seem to alter in a favorable way the microbiome of your gut. Probably through the same mechanisms. Yes, ma'am?
Oh, there are now the apple cider vinegar gummies. What do you think?
So the question is, what about apple cider gummies? I probably should have a polite answer, shouldn't I? And whenever the word gummies is involved, it's probably a bad idea. I can't think of an exception to that rule. So whenever you're looking at somebody who's taken something and stuck it into a factory and regurgitated it, vomited it out at you at an extra cost, then avoid it. When we're talking apple cider vinegar, try to stick to the same stuff that your great-grandmother had and her great-grandmother. Because those are foods we know something about. I had a patient who had a lot of apple cider vinegar gummies, and he came in and he said, you know what they did to me? And I said, no. And he said, they destroyed most of my teeth. Dr. Logue said most of this guy's teeth got destroyed because he was chewing on these apple cider vinegar gummies because they tasted so good. So we're anti-gummy, right across the board. No exceptions. Any other questions? This has been a very quiet audience, and I haven't given you guys much chance to talk. Any other? We like lots of questions from the audience. Yes, sir.
Beef jerky.
Beef jerky.
Good, bad.
I guess it would depend on who made it, what chemicals were in it, how much sugar is in it. The question is beef jerky good for you? I think it really you'd want to take it on a case-by-case basis, look at the ingredients level. If you made it, that's always a pass. Even lemon meringue pie gets a pass, especially if you share it with your physician.
Could you elaborate at all on exercise 3 times a day?
So the exercise 3 times a day is based on 2 lines of reasoning. Going back a little bit, we try not to make any recommendation that doesn't have at least 3 lines of reasoning. And lines of reasoning can be like randomized controlled trials, observational studies, historical precedent, that kind of thing. If you have a little rule for yourself in that fashion, it's a little bit like what I was saying about systematic reviews and meta-analysis rather than single studies. You can't tend to stay away from recommendations that are based on basically a fad that'll be gone in a year or 5 years. So when you look at the metabolic effect of exercise 3 times a day for a given volume of exercise, so the way they do the studies, for example, would be walking 15 minutes 3 times or 45 minutes once. So roughly the same volume of exercise, you see much better metabolic effects in terms of things like blood sugar. So that's one line. Secondly, if you look at historical precedent, humans up until post-World War II didn't go to the gym 3 times a week. They had continuous activity all day. In fact, they really didn't have much in the way of gyms, unless you're a boxer or a power lifter or something. You know, everyday life was your gym. You had to knead bread and haul water and haul wood, blah, blah, blah. So, the historical precedent for exercise is much more of a throughout the day thing than it is for an individual episode. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. How's that for an answer?
Yeah, I came to see you once and you were talking about, short exercise.
You'll notice she said once.
Like 10 minutes or brushing your teeth and hopping or, jump rope a couple times or I got myself.
Did I say hopping while you're brushing your teeth? She's making me look even nuttier than I really am. But
I got myself a mini trampoline.
Excellent.
Yeah, is that good?
Sure. Anything that moves. I don't think there is a bad exercise unless it breaks your ankle.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so you said the relationship between the doctor and the patient. You said, well, if you lost 20 pounds, you wouldn't need that blood pressure medication.
Maybe.
So,
I've got people who are underweight
so is there a
who have high blood pressure.
is there a pact between doctors that it's not good to be that frank with the patient? So I've been waiting for a doctor to say, Deborah, you need to lose 30 pounds to prolong your life.
I'll say it.
The doctor has I need that.
Deborah, I can't really see you, but based on what you just told me, you need to lose 30 pounds.
Thank you. Okay, I'm done.
No, I think in all seriousness, there is a real sensitivity about saying things that are perceived as mean. And I know I've stepped over the line many times and been called on it. Because it's really a narrow, there's not much gray zone between being frank and kind and being frank and kind of mean. So I think a lot of us are kind of trained to stay away from that line. So in defense of my colleagues who are less frank than I am, and probably have more patience than I do, then I think they're just trying to be nice. I think Deborah gets another chance because she.
I just wondered, is that the kindest approach, though?
Oh no, not at all. It's like we shouldn't be telling cancer patients who have fatigue and nausea that they shouldn't exercise. That's not being kind. Oh, so yeah, I completely agree with you. But there's a lot of medicine that's like that. So people get blood tests every year that they don't need. When what they need is a kick in the rear about taking better care of themselves. Instead, we look at their thyroid and their vitamin D level. Do you know how much a vitamin D level? Anybody can know what a vitamin D level costs?
So much that the insurance companies don't cover it.
Well, most of the time they shouldn't. You're talking about $2 or $3, depending on which lab, $200 or $300 for a test that's done religiously every year, and you already know what the result's going to be. But that's what people in Portland expect. Sorry, you get to ask your question now.
So I'm curious, what's going to be the long-term effect on people who are using medication like Ozempic to control weight?
This is a lifestyle medicine's talk. It's not about Ozempic. How's that for a dodge? You like that? Any other questions? Historically, a pound to a pound and a half raw, weighed raw. You don't have to eat it raw. Has pretty good data as being probably a healthy amount. So if you're going to guess, per week, sorry, per week. Dr. Jacob.
Two questions. One, do I avoid putting a teaspoon of sugar in my coffee? And two, what about butter to replace it with olive oil?
The question.
So the question is, should he stop his teaspoon of sugar in coffee because he's such a hedonist? The answer is a teaspoon of sugar has like about 16 calories. It's really hard to get too excited about it one way or another. But I did have a patient who was gaining weight on the little bit of honey she put in her iced tea until I found out it was actually totaling a cup a day of honey. So if it's really just a teaspoon and it's a couple of cups of coffee a day, I wouldn't get too excited about it. But a real man, Dr. Jacob, doesn't have any sweetening. Greg and I know each other, as you might have guessed. And your second question was what? I got distracted.
Butter, I think I use peanut butter. What's your comment?
Yeah, so I think butter has good historical precedent. So butter doesn't have the same kind of evidence for benefit as olive oil does. But when olive oil is not suitable, then butter is a great choice.
I think I have the answer for why doctors don't grab people by the neck and tell them they have to lose 20 pounds. Every single one of my doctors, and I have a lot of doctor friends, have said the answer is because it clearly doesn't do any good. People don't have the motivation, they don't have the discipline, they don't have the knowledge of this kind of stuff. Many people have been on diets for years, and almost always, the statistics are almost always unsuccessful. But I think we're on the cusp of changing exactly because this kind of information is now getting widely spread around. So cheers to you.
Thank you, thank you.
You mentioned the protein powders. Does that also apply to protein shakes?
Yeah, so if it's, Michael Pollan had an interesting quote. He said, if it's a plant, eat it. If it's from a plant, don't. Meaning an industrial plant. So all of these highly processed foods probably are best avoided. And if you ever, as I said, it's really an interesting study to find out how they make these protein powders, right? Like pea protein, they don't just grind up peas, folks. It's a whole chemical process. It's an industrial process. Those aren't peas you're eating, they're chemicals. So yeah, so pretty much if your great grandparents wouldn't recognize it, you probably shouldn't be eating it.
I have a question. I don't eat meat, so I eat more fish, and I always make sure that it's wild and not farm raised. Do you agree with that?
So
There's been a big controversy, as you know.
yeah, there may well be some benefit for wild fish over farm-raised fish. Hypothetically, there probably doesn't need to be because it depends on what the fish are eating. So if your farmed fish eat the same stuff as wild fish, maybe you could have something similar. So I don't know how broad a brush we can paint that with. But societies that eat largely oily fish and don't eat much red meat probably do just as well. And in fact, so there's oily fish in particular, like herring and salmon and so on, have a close overlap, and so do like clams and oysters as well, have a close overlap to red meat anyway. So the actual nutrition spectrum in those foods. So yeah, that's probably a fine option. I do have a bias because I like red meat.
Organic vegetables rather than regular?
We can't find any evidence organic makes any difference at all, or that you can even have a useful definition of organic. But if you want to buy organic, be my guest. And we buy whatever looks better. Yes, ma'am.
Question on fruit every day. Are there good fruits and bad fruits, or are all fruits equal?
We think all fruits are good. I used to talk about the tropical fruits as being something to avoid. We've not been able to find any substantiation of that, and we'd prefer to see people eat any fruit over a cookie.
Bananas in particular? Bananas are good?
Anything.
Okay.
Mangoes, grapes.
You used to,
I've become much more liberal. Yeah.
you used to talk a lot about California olive branch olive oil.
Here's my past coming back to haunt me.
Specifically which olive oil.
Oh, so we would suggest any domestic oil, in other words, any U.S. oil. And that's primarily because we don't actually fully understand what's coming from Europe, and there's apparently a lot of contamination. It seems to me that this should be something that'd be really easy to figure out, but apparently it's not. And so California Olive Ranch is a good source. We really like the Red Ridge Farms, the Durant oil, partly because you can go down and watch them squeezing it. It's kind of fun. It's done in Dundee, Oregon, from Oregon olives and California olives. But on the other hand, let's pretend there's somebody in the audience that had an uncle in Greece that sent him olive oil now and then. That's different, because if you really know your European source, I think there's nothing wrong with European oil. It's purely the being able to identify the source and the likelihood that it's not contaminated is the reason we recommend the domestic oils.
Beans, what kind of beans are the most beneficial?
So the question is, what kind of beans are the most beneficial? There's a lot of these questions that I think are unable to be answered. And anybody who answers them, I think, is kind of usually making something up. I'm not paid to make stuff up. Beans are good. If you like beans, go for them. I like beans. Everybody should like beans. So we would argue whatever beans work for you are great.
Does it matter if you get them from a can or you make them from?
So the question is, should you eat canned beans? It's almost certainly better to cook them yourself, but a canned bean is better than no bean. Where'd we get up to? Oh, this is Portland, right? So this is a very important line. Because it seems to me, I've lived and worked in a couple of places in the world, and I've just never come across a population that's so dedicated to the idea that certain foods are bad for you as Portland. And I just think that that's really unfortunate, unless it's really a case. Like if you're a true celiac or true lactose intolerant or something, then that's kind of a nuisance. But it's a problem. It's a disease. But for most of us, the broadest range of foods we can eat, the better. And the more we decide that certain foods are bad for us, the more limited our diet becomes, and that's probably not great. So we would argue, aim for minimal dietary restrictions. If somebody says a whole food that your grandparents would recognize as bad for you, they're probably wrong, unless it makes you throw up or something. And if you didn't make the food, watch out. It may not even be food. I'm just thinking about a lot of those prepared foods people get from Costco and so on. I'm thinking, what exactly is that? But boy, it tastes good.
How about Zupan's hot bar?
I don't know anything about Zupan's hot bar, but I bet you I'd like everything on it. So, just because I'm against processed foods doesn't mean I don't enjoy them. Okay, what are you going to avoid? The list of foods to avoid is actually relatively short, but it covers a whole lot of the average foods people eat. So sweets, except on special occasions. White or wheat flour. So when you see wheat flour on the label, it means white flour. That's unless it says 100% whole wheat or 100% whole grain or something like that, it's not. And the importance of that is when you don't have a whole grain product, pretty much all of the useful nutrition is stripped out of that, and you're just left with the starch. And that's what is causing big tummies and high blood sugars. And if you need to lose weight, if you get rid of foods made with flour, it's along with sweets, it's one of the really useful steps. If you get rid of breads, pastas, pastries, and crackers, most people find it a lot easier to lose weight. It's not that those foods are necessarily bad for you if they're appropriate to your calorie intake. But if you want to lose weight, they're part of the low-hanging fruit. And watch out for commercial cooking oils apart from extra virgin olive oil. I don't know any oil in the commercial cooking area, like canola, grapeseed, name any of them, that have any evidence for health benefit. Whereas with olive oil, we have a huge range of benefits, dozens and dozens and dozens of studies covering just about every disease process. And so we really think that all of those commercial cooking oils are a mistake. All of them. Any questions? Usually I create some tension on this point. Even avocado oil. And if you want to look into this, Ask the avocado oil salesperson, how do you make this? I would like you to walk through every step in the process of making avocado oil, and you'll be shocked. I actually have a slide on this. And ask them if they go that far, which is really hard to do, to get people to answer this. It's really hard to get the process out of them. Then ask them, what temperature does your oil reach at each of these stages? So let's say you're using a cold pressed X oil. And then you find out that at a certain stage in the processing, it's actually heated up to 250 to 500 degrees Fahrenheit, which is typical in the processing of these oils, because they have to do that to make it taste good. You can't use avocado oil and have a good tasting product, or canola oil. And the canola oil, for example, tastes like turnips, which isn't usually most people's preference. And so you have to strip all those flavors out of it in order to make it edible. Even if that process wasn't the problem, where's the benefit? Why would you use an oil that doesn't have any evidence for benefit when you have an oil that has striking evidence for benefit and historical precedent?
With the diet soda addict, I'm constantly saying, I want that out of the house. You know? He says, what's bad about it? I said, I don't know, but you're not supposed to have it. So what is bad about it?
Diet sodas actually tend to make people eat more. They are associated with more dementia, more kidney problems. All the data is pretty soft. But another question to ask him is this helping your health? Is this going to make you a more vibrant, independent 90-year-old or not? And if the answer is, I don't know, then maybe you should do something else, because being a healthy, vibrant, elderly person is kind of a useful step to make. But you could get a pellet gun and line them up and just show how much fun it is to shoot them. So there is some value. Plan your exercise. Actually, larger weapons than a pellet gun are really good for televisions too, because takes care of them. So, plan your exercise and plan it more than once a day. Remember, historical precedent is humans were active throughout a day. So a minute is a lot better than nothing. And so for those of you who've had to suffer through a visit with me in the office, our office is literally full of exercise equipment. Well, no, not literally full. It's got a lot of air in it. But everywhere you look, there's a skip rope or a slam bell or a kettlebell or a body blade or whatever. Resistance bands, weights. And the reason is we like to show people that you can just, if you have a weight near your desk, whatever weight works for you, you can do some curls and presses with it. And with virtually no effort at all, get your metabolic rate up. You can get it up every hour. We had a patient come in who wanted to get off his blood pressure medicines. And he was pretty successful at losing 30 to 40 pounds. And I said, wow. And he did it fairly quickly. He changed some diet things, and he and his wife had worked together as partners, and it helps a lot when the whole household works together. And he said, you know what I think really made the difference? He said, the high steps. And so every hour he would do this for 1 minute. Try that for 1 minute. I wouldn't do it because I get short of breath and then it's hard to talk. But it's things like that. But he had the attitude that says, I'm going to make this happen. He didn't look for excuses. He looked for a plan. And games. I think games are underrated as well. We talked about fun earlier on. The other thing about games is they really seem to be very protective against dementia. The strongest data, believe it or not, is for table tennis. But whatever works for you. Find some people to play with, and physically active games. And so instead of playing board games, well, you can play board games, I guess, but try to find multiple times per week people that you can play games with. Mr. Kiefer down here, he and I used to play Ultimate Frisbee together. And The kids got older and sort of that group was falling apart. But we had a great time playing Ultimate Frisbee. And that also brings different generations together. So we had 3 generations out on that field playing Ultimate Frisbee. Watch out for sitting. If you're sitting for more than an hour, watch out. Oh, we're at an hour and a half now.
I found dancing is great activity.
Dancing?
Social,
Yeah.
between, I go like 3 or 4 nights a week, really good time.
And I had a patient just come in who just learned, she's a Japanese patient, she just had learned line dancing. And she was just aglow with how much fun she was having line dancing. Her husband died last year, and it was, it sort of opened up a new life for her.
What is a body blade? I've never heard of it.
I should have brought one. It's a piece of fiberglass, different lengths, and basically you just shake it. It's essentially a pulse weight method, but it's beautiful because it gives you a lot of core activity, and nobody ever gets injured. So, but it's worth. And if you go on YouTube, you get there's a million different YouTubes on how to use a body blade. At every age.
There's also one, 2 physical therapists that show you how to make one. And you just go to Home Depot and buy a plastic fiberglass board.
And yeah,
And then they cut it.
so you can make your own for probably $5.
Yep,
Or you can buy theirs for $100.
yep.
But the $100 one does work pretty well. And you only have to buy one in a lifetime, so it's not too bad. And think about the biological mechanisms. So when you're exercising, don't think of it as a weight loss tool, because it's not. The one thing exercise doesn't do is help you lose weight. It helps you maintain weight loss, and it helps you redistribute weight, but it's a lousy weight loss tool. It's a health tool. And the health basis is all kinds of different mechanisms that it helps. And so think of it as, like if you're somebody who takes a vitamin every day, first of all, ask yourself why. But secondly, think of this as being the world's best vitamin. In fact, when I see somebody taking antioxidant vitamins and they're not exercising, I think, who's educating you? You're obviously not coming to my lectures. So you can sort of end up like this, or you can be like my mother-in-law. These 2 people are probably the same age. Or you can be like my wife. And it's never too young to start. This was my son some years ago. And there's a lot more things you can do. Sunlight has an effect. Outdoor time, it has an effect all by itself. Sauna or hot bath, the data for heat through sauna or hot bath is really quite striking. Fun, we talked about. Friends, we talked about. Gratitude. My poor son has to hear this just about, well, not every day, but frequently, that any day that warm water comes out of the tap, you've got a roof over your head and enough food to eat, it's a pretty good day by world standards, even right now, especially right now.
Is there any recommendation about like how much or how often, if you have access to a sauna?
Typically sauna, bathing, the studies are done about 3 times per week, about 10, 15 minutes at a time, around 170, 180 degrees. Hot bath data is similar, but the temperatures are usually around 104.
Yes.
What does
So.
the sauna do for you?
Good question. Nobody knows why saunas and hot baths work, but the outcomes data show lower total mortality, especially less heart disease mortality. It might be sort of a fever effect. This is why some of us don't believe in treating fevers to lower temperature, because the fever is part of your immune response. So it might be a fever effect that somehow raising your core body temperature alters your immune response in a favorable way. Nobody really knows though.
Is there a difference between the infrared saunas versus the traditional sauna?
I've never found, so a traditional sauna, the question is there a difference between infrared and traditional saunas? The thing about traditional saunas is they raise your core body temperature. I've never seen any data for that with respect to infrared saunas. I suspect that if they did that, they would be advertising that. So I doubt that, so if before I bought an infrared sauna, I'd find out if it raises your core body temperature or not. Or it just makes you feel hot.
What about a sauna blanket?
If it raises your core body temperature, I'm all for it. Find out if it raises your core body temperature. That's the only marker I know of that has any likely validity. And then as you're planning and executing, review. I find people, once again, they have good intentions, but they aren't asking themselves every day, do my actions reflect my intentions? And if you're not asking yourself that every day, you're probably going to fall off the wagon. And so look back to learn what worked for you. Look forward to plan and execute. But execute. You know, it'd be really good if people like me had to go out and earn an honest living as a plumber or something. You know? And what are you measuring? And if you don't have something to measure, and it could be something that's just like mood or well-being or something like that, but if you don't have something to measure, then you're probably not thinking about it enough, because there is something you can measure. So this is the same list we started with, but appreciate the power you hold over your health and use it wisely. And you're going to do far more for yourself than anything any physician can do for you. Now we can help. Obviously, we think we can. We think we can help because, you know, even those of us who are heavily in the lifestyle medicine space, we can sort of talk to you about how to use something wisely for your given health condition. For example, the lady with Wegener's early on, the granulomatosis lady who was in kidney failure. That was extremely high-risk condition, and her choice of lifestyle medicine was a high-risk choice. And so that's why we followed her really, really carefully, measuring everything that we could to make sure we were heading in the right direction. You wouldn't want to do that on a whim. But there is something we did do on a whim. Aisha, do you feel like talking about your
I can do that.
your
Do you want me to
epistaxis?
stand up or
Yeah.
sit from here?
So Aisha kindly agreed to talk about her adventure in natural healing. So some of the things we do are kind of on the wild side. And so we call them adventures in natural healing. So Aisha had, how long had you been having your nose bleed from your left nostril?
A little over a month.
And they were fairly bad bleeds?
The concern was they happened often.
And they were a nuisance?
And they were a nuisance, and I
So-
was tired of them.
And you weren't going to die?
I was absolutely going to die. So
Oh, no, I don't think she
ran
wasn't.
to the doctor.
So this was a month. And so my partner had tried everything. I'd tried everything. Her nose was still bleeding. She was still talking to us, which is kind of nice. And so we were going to send her to our ENT colleagues who do a really nice job, but it's kind of, I don't know if any of you have had cautery to your nose, but it's a little uncomfortable and sometimes has to be done a couple of times, and it costs money, it costs time, and all kinds of stuff. So we tried one last thing. Can you describe what we tried?
Yeah, and I did not know that I was the first person he recommended this to until after the fact. Just had to say that.
Maybe my full disclosure was a little lacking.
But I trust Dr. Hassell. So yeah, so I went home and he said to put honey in my nostril and lay down flat on my back. And
May I interrupt at this point?
yeah,
Can I give you the rationale? And then she'll continue her story. So honey does a couple of things. One is honey causes clotting. And secondly, honey has a long history as a optimal wound treatment. So if you have a wound, especially one that might become infected, honey has a long and storied record in the medical literature. In fact, you can go and get FDA approved honey gauze for unbelievably expensive prices, when you can actually just make it yourself at really low prices, because the FDA agrees that honey is really effective. So that's my rationale. There was a rationale, I promise.
and I had used honey when I ripped open my knee running in Silver Falls, so I had experience with that. So I remember asking, well, how much honey? And he said, as much as you can stand. So I took a Q-tip and then I'm like, wow, I can stand more. So I took a huge Q-tip and filled my nostril up and went and laid down flat on my back and waited for about 5 minutes, and then it started stinging. It wasn't painful. It was just a light sting. It was like a postnasal drip, and I felt it all just dripping down the back. Laid there about 20 minutes till it stopped stinging, got up, and the other thing we didn't say, I had COVID in the midst of this somewhere, and I had it kind of settled here and was congested. All that went away, and I haven't had a bloody nose for now 3.5 weeks.
So now, the thing is, you have to have a certain amount of courage to do this because it sounds nutty. But what's the downside? There's no
Bloody
downside.
nose.
What was that?
You have a bloody nose.
Yeah, well, but you already had a bloody nose, so that is you're not
It didn't work, you just have.
right. You end up in Dr. Patel's office, and he cauterizes it, and you just pretend you never suggested the honey part. But you have to have a certain amount of willingness to walk on the wild side to try ideas like that. But if you try ideas like that, you're sometimes really going to win. So
And I would also say that it takes trust in your doctor and a little logical thinking to go, how could honey hurt me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And but
Yeah,
did you
exactly.
say that your nose was clear, or did you already mention that your
Oh
sinus
yeah,
clear?
like it was, my nose felt better than it has in years. Like that kind of good.
And it's actually because of the osmotic pressure of honey. So honey is something that sucks fluid out of other stuff. And honey also, basically there's no contamination of honey with bacteria because bacteria can't live in it. You can get botulism spores, which is rare, but that can happen. But honey is by nature sterile. You can haul honey out of the tombs of the pharaohs. I'm not making this up. And it's still edible. So honey is kind of unique in its chemical stability. And so my guess is the honey sort of sucked all that mucus out of her schnoz because of the osmotic pressure of it. So I'm looking for somebody with chronic congestion who will try it.
So on the initial story you were talking about where there was this whole team of doctors, from various different points of view.
Well, that's because the patient was going to die, and we wanted to share the blame.
Well, I'm just curious how that all came about. I mean, did one
We just talked to each other.
doctor recommend other ones, or?
Oh yeah. We working as teams is sort of normal for us.
No, I was just, it's like sometimes you get somebody who, if they know that somebody's gonna be contrary to what they're doing, then it's a little apprehensive about doing it.
Well, when you do it in a sort of responsible fashion, you're tracking to what's going on. You've got a rationale. The patient's on board. I mean, it takes communication. But most doctors are used to working in teams. That's kind of normal. And most doctors are used to a certain amount of disagreement. Hey, I think you should take out that appendix. I think we should wait a little longer. I think we should try some antibiotics. I think, and so on. So disagreement between us is relatively common. And then sometimes people just say to me, Miles, you're kind of quirky. And that's true enough too. I say, well, if the quirky doesn't work, we go on to what you've got, If any of you are interested, we've got you need to talk to Shelley, but we've got a couple of seats left at a little intimate fundraiser that we're going to be having in Lake Oswego. So there's only a couple of seats available. It's a pretty small gathering. So if anybody's interested, then just talk to Shelley, because we're trying to get this greatmed.org thing stable over time so we can have more writers and pump out more material. If any of you have gone to greatmed.org, and sort of seen how we handle diabetes. So what we're trying to do, and you'll see it in the diabetes section, is have a section that for physicians that gives them all the background data that's also available to the patients, and then a summarized section for patients to say, hey, here's what you need to do for your diabetes or multiple sclerosis or whatever. And this, if you want all the background data, you can read the physician part. It's available to everybody, and it's all free. So that's the intention of what greatmed.org is all about. And greatmed.org is what's behind this meeting today. And that's a look at the homepage on greatmed.org. Have I mentioned greatmed.org enough? Greatmed.org is the website. And we're just starting a podcast. So we would really like especially negative feedback on the podcast for anybody who's listening to it, because we're trying to get it to be useful for people. And that's the book. It's in our 4th edition by my sister and I. And I think that's it. So thank you very much. Any other questions?